podcast here at the Paisano, formerly known as Flipping the Bird. However, have not created a new name yet. My name is Luke Lawhorn. I'm the sports editor here at the Paisano, the independent student newspaper for the UTSA community. It has been a long time coming with the podcast, with school, constant games, just learning the new system here at the Paisano. But I'm glad to sit here and talk about the amazing season the Roadrunner football is having. This evening I'll talk about the college football playoff rankings and UTSA being criminally left out of the top 25. I will then talk about the matchup between UTSA and North Texas for the Conference USA Championship and what it will mean for the UTSA program. I will then finish with UTSA basketball talk as they've just begun their season and going on their little break due to finals week. But first, UTSA football may be one of the fastest growing programs in the country. Going back-to-back with 10-win seasons, going a perfect 8-0 in conference play this season, and possibly winning another conference championship has guided UTSA to national attention. It's important to note that there's 3 different polls in college football. As already mentioned, the conference college football playoff rankings, which sets teams up for the championship game, and bowl games, which is the most important thing in college football and the ultimate goal. But there's also 2 other polls called the AP poll, voted by a collective of coaches and media to rank teams 1 through 25, and also the college football coaches poll, where all the coaches collectively rank 25 programs due to all the points and other voting metrics they have. UTSA is ranked 23 in both the AP and coaches poll, but neither of those polls will have any destination for UTSA, because the only thing that sets up postseason play and bowl games will be the playoff poll. So first and foremost, the Roadrunners are not ranked. At the top, of course, are programs such as Georgia, Michigan, TCU, and USC rounding up the top 4. Blue blood teams like Ohio State, Alabama will find themselves 5 and 6, and so on. Of course, I'm not sitting here ranting that UTSA should be up there with, Ohio State, Penn State, Clemson, etc. But the back end of the top 25 is pretty questionable. And I think for UTSA, the problems start at number 17, UCLA, who is 9 and 3. UTSA is 10 and 2 so far at the conclusion of the regular season. Every team plays 12 games. Going 10 and 2 for a Power 5 school would land you at least top 10. Looking at the rankings right now, Washington, number 12, is 10 and 2. But of course, UTSA is a Group of 5 school, earning them not as much respect as, an SEC school or a Big Ten school. Number 17, UCLA, however, is 9 and 3. And I think UTSA has a pretty comparable schedule to UCLA. And before I want to dive into 17 through 25, I want to break those 8 numbers into 3 different categories. The first group teams ranked 17 through 20. Okay, I can see, but I'll at least argue. So the teams ranked 17 through 20, which are UCLA, Tulane, South Carolina, and Texas. I can see how they're ranked ahead of UTSA, but I have a great argument for each and every one of them. Teams ranked 21 and 22, who's Notre Dame and UCF. Are we sure? Are we sure they're ranked higher than UTSA? Are we sure they're better than them? Are we sure that if they were to play tomorrow that they would handle UTSA? Because I'm not. And finally, the third group is, you've got to be kidding me, teams 23, 24, 25, which are North Carolina, Mississippi State, and NC State. And those final 2 teams, Mississippi State and NC State, are both 8 and 4. So they have double the amount of losses that UTSA has, yet are nationally ranked, and UTSA is not. Something to know before the rant: of the 9 teams outrageously ranked ahead of UTSA, 5 of them have 4 losses. Only 1 has 2 losses, which is Tulane at 18, the highest ranked Group of 5 school. However, I don't think their resume is necessarily better than UTSA's, and definitely not 9 spots higher. So first coming in, starting at 17 with UCLA, 9-3. You know, last week they battled USC, who's a top 4 program, until the bitter end, lost by 3 points. Okay, if you want to give UTSA or UCLA number 17, fine. But number 18, Tulane, is pretty interesting to me, as they sit there with a 10-2 record. Tulane is in the AAC conference, the American Athletic, who UTSA, by the way, will join next season. So there will be matchups, and UTSA definitely should keep that in mind when they face. Tulane's out-of-conference schedule includes UMass, Alcorn State, Kansas State, pretty respectable, ranked number 10, and Southern Miss. 3 of those 4 teams are pretty awful, as none of them are even in the FBS, besides Kansas State, of course. And Tulane's 2 losses are both at home, and one of them was to pitiful Southern Miss, 27-24, who, by the way, is in the Sun Belt Conference, arguably the worst conference of college football, and the FBS, of course. And then UCF just a couple weeks ago, 38-31. Tulane and UCF, yes, are both ranked and both in the same conference. And yes, will rematch this weekend in the conference championship game. However, those 2 losses are not any better than UTSA's 2 losses, which we'll get into later. Southern Miss is a pretty, okay program in the Sun Belt. However, they don't stack up to UTSA and wouldn't compete in the Conference USA conference that UTSA lies. And UCF, as we'll talk about later, has 3 losses, so I'm not necessarily sure that's a good loss, especially when at home. Number 19, South Carolina Gamecocks. There may not be another team in the country who's finished their season with a better or more momentum than the Gamecocks have. Of course, beating Tennessee by a wide margin, and of course, going to Clemson, ending their long streak of their home games that they've won. I think it was well over 30. But they're still 8-4, and of course they play in that Southeastern Conference, which is known to be wildly overrated, and honestly just very favorable in the committee's eyes, who vote the top 25 teams. South Carolina's 4 losses include Arkansas, Georgia, Missouri, and Florida. Of course, all 4 of those losses come from other teams in the SEC conference, but they're not necessarily close. See, that first loss against Arkansas was 44-30. Okay. Next was Georgia, 48-7. I don't think a team should be ranked number 19 after getting blown out 48-7, which that game was at home, by the way, for the Gamecocks. But if you want to call Georgia, the number 1 ranked team in the country, which they technically are, then fine. You can get over Georgia and maybe Arkansas 44-30. But then they go on to lose to Missouri 23-10, and that loss doesn't look really great at all. And then you go to that 4th and final loss against the Florida Gators 38-6. So not only do they have 4 losses to UTSA's 2, but not one of those games were within 1 score. The closest game was 23-10? Whatever. And then the final team in the first group is Texas, number 20 Texas at 8-4. Texas, I think, has a good case to be ranked ahead of UTSA because not only is Texas a nationally known brand, but they also beat UTSA head-to-head. So head-to-head has to matter. Therefore, UTSA should be no way ranked ahead of UT. However, they still have 4 losses. Of course, to Alabama at the second game of the season, 20-19, which Texas should have won. However, went on to lose 2 weeks later to Texas Tech, 37-34, even though Quinn Ewers, the star quarterback of Texas, was injured. So that loss can be looked past. But then they lose to Oklahoma State, 41-34, and Oklahoma State's turned out to be the ultimate fraud in college football. And then 2 weeks ago, lost to TCU 17-10. None of those losses are necessarily bad. They just have 4 of them. So those are the 3 teams in the okay, I can see, but I'll argue stage. So now we go on to the are we sure group. And these 2 teams, Notre Dame and UCF, I'm just not quite sure they're better than UTSA. We start with Notre Dame at 21, who's 8-4. And their 4 losses include at Ohio State in the season opener, 21-10. Not a bad loss. But they follow that game up with a home loss to Marshall, 26-21. A Power 5 school like Notre Dame is, with the pedigree they have, should not lose at home in South Bend to Marshall, 26-21. That's a bad loss. They then go ahead and lose to Stanford a couple weeks later, 16-14, also at home. And that 2-point loss to Stanford's not necessarily great. Stanford's not as good as they have been in years past. But then Notre Dame went on a 4 or 5 game win streak. Blew teams out, climbed the rankings, climbed all the way to 15 before last week, losing to USC in the Coliseum 38-27. The Trojans are now ranked number 4. Not necessarily a bad loss, of course, by 9 points, so Notre Dame dropped to 21. I'm not necessarily sure what we get with Notre Dame. In fact, of all the teams ranked 17 through 25, I would probably put Notre Dame at the top of that list. They've just had to grow with the new coach, Marcus Freeman. However, they land at 21, and I'm not necessarily sure they would beat UTSA in the Alamo Dome. Moving on from Notre Dame in the Are We Sure category, we go to number 22, UCF. UCF sits at 9-3 and is the only other Group of 5 school on this ranking. UCF did beat a couple weeks ago Tulane, who of course we already mentioned is ranked at 18, so I guess that's a good win. However, I think both these teams are maybe not necessarily overrated. However, I don't think they would beat UTSA. UCF's 3 losses include Louisville, 20-14. Pretty close, and I'm pretty sure that was the second game of the season. East Carolina, yikes, 34-13. And Navy, 2 weeks ago, 17-14. Now, Navy is a historic program. They are Navy. They are disciplined. They do have the triple option. However, coming off a Tulane victory to lose to Navy 17-14 at home, I may add, is just not okay, especially for being ranked 22 when UTSA has not had a loss that's as bad as any of those 3 losses. And they have 1 loss fewer than UCF. So that's why Notre Dame and UCF sit in the Are We Sure category, because I'm not sure they would beat the Roadrunners if they were to face tomorrow. The third and final group of You've Got to Be Kidding Me includes 23 North Carolina, 24 Mississippi State, and 25 NC State. We'll start with the Tar Heels at number 23, who also will sit at 9-3. 3 losses including Notre Dame 45-32, Georgia Tech 21-17, and NC State 30-27. Notre Dame, yes, I said, is better than all these teams we're mentioning, who currently sits at 21, having already 4 losses. But when North Carolina played Notre Dame, it was in Chapel Hill, as were all 3 of North Carolina's losses, all at home. And Notre Dame was not riding high by any mean. They lost to Ohio State already. They had lost to Marshall already. They had already lost to Stanford. So coming in Chapel Hill when North Carolina was just getting wins, were exposed as fraudulent, getting beat 45-32. Georgia Tech also played North Carolina at home, defeating the Tar Heels 21-17, another bad loss. And in-state rival NC State came into town last weekend and beat them 30-27 in overtime. The Wolfpack aren't good, and because they aren't good, however, did beat North Carolina, got them ranked to 25, so now we have 2 ACC teams ranked 23 and 25. Those are just not good losses. And, of course, as I've already said about all of these teams, none of these losses are better than UTSA's loss. Going on to 24, another very wildly overrated SEC team, Mississippi State. 8-4 has lost to LSU, 31-16, Kentucky, 27-17, Alabama, 30-6. Wow. And then Georgia, 45-19. So, like many college football, we'll call it investigators, assume that the playoff is ranking these SEC teams pretty high to give teams like Alabama and Georgia, even LSU, more credibility for, beating the Vault and 24 Mississippi State, team. However, those losses don't look good for Mississippi State at all. Their closest loss was by 10 points to Kentucky, who has also been exposed and is falling completely off of these rankings. And LSU obviously just lost to Texas A&M, who's won 5 games, is not bowl eligible, and LSU was supposed to represent the SEC East Division in the SEC Championship game this Saturday. So none of these losses are that impressive. And, not any losses were within one score. Just like another SEC team we already talked about in South Carolina, who is also 8-4, yet skyrocketed all the way to number 19. The final team, NC State at 25, is also 8-4, and because they beat the Tar Heels, the committee just had to rank them instead of UTSA. So not only do I think UTSA should be, ranked 17th, 18th, 19th, and so on, if they were just to be ranked 25th, the final spot in the rankings, they would take NC State's spot, who's 8-4. One could argue that does it really matter if you're the final team ranked? And I think it does for a school like UTSA, who's one of the fastest growing programs in all of college football. And that national exposure would do nothing but benefit UTSA, while NC State is not even better than UTSA. Of course, already double losses with 4. They lost to Texas Tech 27-14. Yikes. They lost Clemson 30-20, which Clemson is not nearly as good as years past, but obviously are head and shoulders better than NC State. They then lose to Boston College 21-20. That's not a good loss. 21-20 to Boston College? And then finally lost to Louisville 25-10. So 3 of these 4 losses were over 10 points. Not looking impressive. And yet I don't know why any of these losses are held to a different standard than the Roadrunners. If you go back to Tulane at number 18, they are 10-2. They have the best statistical record of everybody on here. The highest ranked group of 5 team. Yet their loss to Southern Miss and UCF aren't nearly in the same ballpark as UTSA's. If we were to do a blind resume against Team A with Team B, this is how it would fall. Team A and Team B both have 2 losses, so we'll just call that a wash. For Team A, both of their losses were at home. As a college football program, especially when you're ranked, you want to protect home field. That's what, separates a good team from a fraudulent team. Team B had 1 loss at home, which may have been the season opener in triple overtime. And the second loss was in one of the top 10 highest, capacity stadiums in the country. Of course, these 2 teams are anonymous. Team A's out-of-conference schedule is pretty laughable. UMass, Alcorn State, Southern Miss. While Team B played teams such as Texas, Houston, Army, and Texas Southern, but, everybody needs their cupcake team. Both teams are first in their conference. Team A is first in their conference by a game, while Team B firmly leads their conference for a second consecutive season, I may add. You may have guessed it, Team A is Tulane, Team B is UTSA. UTSA and Tulane have the same amount of losses, while UTSA's out-of-conference schedule is much better. We've been talking about all these, 9 teams that I think, maybe they do deserve to be ranked, but I'm not sure ahead of UTSA. But let's talk about the Roadrunners and how their schedule stacks up. So UTSA, of course, opened with Army and lost in triple overtime at home, 37-35. But if somebody watched that game, nobody would say Houston played better. The first loss, of course, season opener, UTSA allowed 17 points in the fourth quarter. Yikes. In the first 2.5 quarters, UTSA dominated that game. And by the way, Tulane played UH this season in Week 5 and did defeat Houston, the Cougars. However, it was just 27-24, also in overtime. So Houston took both these teams to overtime, but against UTSA was in the season opener when UTSA, of course, lost all their players. Didn't have an identity without Sincere McCormick at running back. Frank Harris had all those yards and just came up short in the third overtime. And you could blame refs, honestly. UTSA should have won that game. However, they didn't, and Tulane did defeat Houston I wouldn't say handily at all in overtime, but it was in Week 5. It's not nearly as impressive. UTSA went on the road to play another overtime game against Army, 41-38, and that's a hard win in Army. Iconic stadium up there in West Point, back-to-back emotional games, and then that third week go to Texas and play the Longhorns, who held Bama to 20 points, just lost 20-19, and UTSA was, what was the score at halftime? It was 17-all at halftime. It was a tie game in front of 102,000 people. Of course, UTSA just couldn't keep up with the talent in the fourth quarter, lost 41-20. However, has won 9 games since then. 9 games. Started 1-2 and went on a 9-game winning streak, including absolutely handling Texas Southern 52-24, Middle Tennessee 45-30, and so on. They did play North Texas at home this season. They did win 31-27. We'll talk about that in a moment as the two teams play this Saturday. But UTSA's resume, of course, beating UAB, number 1 defense in Conference USA, 44-38, also in overtime. And then bounced back with defeating LA Tech 51-7. UTSA should definitely be ranked. And if you're not going to put them ahead of, Tulane at 18, South Carolina at 19, which is questionable, at least ahead of NC State and Mississippi State at 24 and 25. So UTSA plays North Texas this weekend on Friday night, and what will be their second straight Conference USA championship game. UTSA did already play North Texas, as mentioned, defeated them 31-27 thanks to a game-winning drive constructed by Frank Harris through that pass to DeCorian Clark in the end zone. It was a great moment. Glad I could be there. So UTSA already beat them once. What's the game plan to do it again? It's hard to beat a team twice in football, really in any sport, but especially in football, especially when the game was as close as it was a couple weeks ago. Last season, UNT defeated UTSA in their final game to ruin UTSA's perfect 12-0 season, finished 11-1. They came back with that vengeance, won on the 22nd of October, and they, of course, want to do it again this Saturday. What's going to be the key to the game? Well, of course, UTSA has got to stop going to overtime. They went to overtime against Houston, and they went to overtime against Army. They went to overtime against UAB. They just have all these one-possession games. And their season finale last week defeated UTEP 34-31 after trailing 24-0. So UTSA, they cannot let North Texas stay in the game. They got to put them away early and not rely on Frank Harris to lead another historic comeback. They also got to make sure they get more, out there with their receivers. With DeCorian Clark getting injured and being sidelined for the rest of the year a few weeks ago has kind of slowed down the offense, as DeCorian Clark was the leader of Conference USA in passing yards. But Joshua Cephas and Zachary Franklin are great receivers and obviously can step up their game. But if, North Texas locks one of them down, what's left? Well, the explosion of running backs at UTSA, obviously Frank Harris taking rushing yards, but Kavorian Barnes and Brendan Brady helping take the load, that'll be key in defeating North Texas. And just preventing not only an overtime game, but a game late in the fourth quarter. All these one-possession games catch up to UTSA, and they've had the better quarterback in every game they've faced. But soon enough, he might run out of juice. So they're going to have to take this game early. It's going to be in front of an expected 45-plus thousand people, which will be the highest capacity game by far this season. And more than last year's conference championship game, which had a little over 41,000. So those will be keys for UTSA, to put this game away early and go on and win their first ever bowl game in UTSA's program history. Coach Traylor will go down as, who knows, a quietly top 10 coach in the nation. Third year here, all 3 years, just gets better and better. All 3 years bowl eligible, wins 7 games, then you go to 10 games, now possibly 11 or 12. Sign me up. And finally, I'd like to touch on men's basketball for a moment as they've begun their season. Men's basketball is now 5-3 on the year and just finished their hosting the tournament, the 2-0 San Antonio Shootout, which I just think so far that this season is fool's gold for UTSA basketball. They started, 5-1 this season, 4-1, excuse me. But they were just beating up on pretty, below average teams. The first game against Trinity, 74-47. Yeah, dominant win, but Trinity, I know it's an in-city rival and all, but UTSA is a Division I school about to go to the AAC conference. Our players are just so much better than theirs. It's not fair. And they did lose their second game of the season to Texas A&M Corpus Christi, 75-55. Yikes, big blowout loss. But that was the only game they've had on the road this season. Fun fact: they went 4-1. The one loss was on the road. All the other 4 games, yeah, they look big, bad, mighty strong, and they have looked good. But they were against inferior opponents at home in the Convocation Center. That third game against St. Mary's, they won 66-59. Fourth game against Texas State, that was pretty impressive, 61-56, and then the final game, 82-75. See, all these games are within 10 points, except that blowout win against Trinity. So, Prairie View A&M, Texas State, St. Mary's, those are no, programs to just look past, but they're not Houston, they're not Tulane, they're not these teams you're going to play next season in the AAC conference. They're not even UAB or North Texas. Well, we go to the San Antonio Shootout, which just happened this past weekend. UTSA went 1-2. They lost the first game to Grambling State, also 75-55. Unlucky score for the Roadrunners. They just got absolutely blown out in the first half. They kept it close in the second half, but the damage was already done. And they lost an overtime game on Sunday, the 27th, 78-77 against Dartmouth. Of course, that's a very smart school up there in the Northeast, but whatever. 78-77, that was a blown game for UTSA, which, by the way, that was the game Jacob Germany became the 18th Roadrunner to hit over 1,000 points. So shout out to Jacob Germany for hitting that career mark. That's nothing to, be upset about. That's a great thing to do. 18th player in Roadrunner history, over 1,000 points, and led the game, by the way, with 27 points and 13 rebounds. Went 3 of 10 from the 3, but if he gets that down, oof, he would be a problem. The Roadrunners did win their final game against UIW, another in-city rival, 68-62. Of course, UIW shouldn't be in UTSA's league, but UTSA, being the second worst team in Conference USA last year, and all their new additions have helped the program. Hopefully they'll be a lot better, and right now, they're just trying to gel, mix in with each other. But yeah, first half against UIW, they led 32-26 and kept it nip and tuck in that second half, both teams having 36 points, but UTSA edged ahead by 6 points there at the end. Jacob Germany again led the game with 15 points and 11 rebounds. So back-to-back, double-double games by Germany. John Bugs III with 14 points, and he's been a great addition to the team, really hitting some big-time threes. He went 4 of 6 against UIW from beyond the arc. He's been a great addition. And so the runners have over a week off due to finals before they come back, and they go to back-to-back road games over there in the Mountain West region. Go to Albuquerque, New Mexico to play New Mexico, and then play at Utah. That'll be a big game against a Pac-12 school in Salt Lake City on December 13th before coming home December 18th. So it'll be great to see what the Roadrunners can do the rest of this calendar year 2022, and hopefully when we come back in 2023, they go on a roll and head in the right direction before the Conference USA Championship game. Well, that's all I have today. Thank you for tuning in and listening to my rant about the college football rankings and why UTSA is just criminally being underrated, not even getting in the top 25. I'm sure after this weekend, if UTSA takes care of business on Saturday, we will find ourselves on the ranking and then look forward to a bowl game. Hopefully I can get back on the mic within the next couple weeks to talk about UTSA and their bowl matchup. But as always, I'm Luke Lawhorn. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for watching. Click our logo to subscribe or click the videos for more from the Paisano. Leave a comment letting us know your thoughts and what you'd like to see us cover next.